Today you've worked enough. Save your strength for tonight. The cowboy's low voice cut across the hot ranch yard like a whip, striking straight into the heart of his new bride. Sweat clung to her neck, dust to her dress, and before she could answer, he swept her off the wooden step. Inside, the worn sofa waited. Their breaths tangled, buttons slipped free under the last rays of sunlight pouring through the door. She trembled, caught between retreat and the desperate wish to be seen, not as a traded good, but as a woman truly desired. And the question lingered. Would this night end her fear, or begin a home that was finally her own? Dawn spread a thin veil of light across the prairie. On the wide wooden porch, the new bride sat alone. The wedding dress from yesterday still clung to her, its hem dirt-stained, a few seams already loose. No one had called her up. No one had spoken to her. In the pale morning glow, her eyes were empty, like a mirror not yet showing a reflection. She remembered the day before, a wedding swift and hollow, without flowers, without music, just a dry handshake. Her father had placed her hand into that of the man, the wealthy cowboy, master of the ranch, and turned away as though relieved of a debt. The new husband had only nodded, his gray-blue eyes revealing nothing. Then he had lifted her onto a horse and carried her back to the ranch. The ride was long and silent, the air thick with the smell of dry grass, dust clinging to her veil. Upon arrival, he pointed to a room prepared for her and left. Their wedding night passed in silence. And so this morning she sat there. No tears left. Only one thought echoing. She had been given away like merchandise. Nothing more. From the yard, the steady sound of hooves broke the stillness. Her new husband stood near the stable, tall against the early light. He led his horse, checked the reins, yet his eyes drifted toward the porch. From a distance she felt that gaze, cold, though not entirely void. She lowered her face, pulling the dress across her cracked feet. Her heart stirred for a moment, then sank again. He did not look at her as a wife. To him, she was only proof that a marriage had taken place, to still the gossip of the town. Bootsteps rang on the hard ground, each one distinct in the silence. Her breath caught. He stopped behind her, said nothing. His low breath brushed her shoulders. Then his voice came, rough and clipped. "Eat something. There's work to be done on the ranch." Only a single line, yet it struck her chest sharp. He moved into the house. Later, when she was fumbling in the kitchen, standing on tiptoe to reach a skillet hung too high, her hand slipped. At that moment, he stepped in, lifted it down with ease. His calloused hand brushed the back of hers, hot, startling. Her heart skipped. He set the pan on the stove and turned away without a word. It was a fleeting instant, but it stayed with her. A step aside to let her pass, a chance touch. Small things, yet they told her she was not entirely abandoned. She stood in the kitchen, staring out the window. His figure moved by the stables, broad and steady, working in silence. He never looked back, but she knew someday his gaze might rest on her, not because of a bargain, but because of who she was. For the first time since the wedding, a fragile thought rose within her. Perhaps this was not an ending, but the beginning of another journey. The first days at the ranch stretched long and heavy, as if nothing had changed since the wedding. Two people shared the same roof, yet the distance between them was as wide as the prairie itself. They seldom crossed paths, and when they did, it was only with curt nods or clipped words. She rose early, swept the porch, lit the fire and stirred the pot of corn. One task followed another: washing, cleaning rooms, hauling water from the well. Her hands, already rough from a lifetime of labor, grew harder still. But the weight she carried was not the work. It was the eyes of those around her. The ranch hands whispered whenever she passed. Some sneered, saying the master had only taken a wife to gain another servant. Others muttered just loud enough for her to hear that a black woman in a wedding dress was nothing more than a body filling a void. Each word pierced like a needle to the heart. She bowed her head and worked harder, as if toil itself could prove she had worth. The cowboy, her husband, rarely spoke, but he watched. Most often from a distance, leading his horse or leaning on the fence to survey the herd. When she bent over the well rope or wrestled with firewood, his eyes lingered longer than before. He never stepped forward, never stopped the tongues of others, but in his gaze there was no scorn, only a quiet struggle. One late afternoon, she lifted a bucket too heavy. Water spilled over, soaking her skirt, her arms shaking as if she might drop it. From across the yard, the cowboy shifted, a foot rising to move toward her. Then he stopped, his hand curling into a fist, then loosening. He turned away, leaving her to bear the weight alone. She never saw it, but his chest sank heavy, as though he too had missed something vital. Meals in the ranch house were plain and silent. The hands ate apart, while she and he sat at the long kitchen table. The scrape of knife and fork filled the stillness. She kept her head bowed, taking small bites, as if fear of reproach could keep her invisible. Then one evening, as she placed her bowl of rice down quietly, he reached across and set a piece of meat into it. The gesture was small, but it shook her to her core. She lifted her eyes and met his, no longer cold, but measured, deliberate. "Pay no mind to what they say." His voice was low, rough, yet firm enough to cut through the wind outside. "Do your work well, that's enough." She froze. For the first time since the wedding, his words were not command, but counsel, perhaps even a shield. Tears rose and she turned quickly, afraid he might see. That night, lying alone in her room, the words circled in her head. "Pay no mind to what they say." Simple as they were, they pulled her back from the dark quiet that had pressed down on her days. For the first time, she wondered if beyond the gulf between them, something else flickered. Perhaps not affection, but recognition. The cowboy kept his calm exterior, still sparing with words. Yet after, that evening, his eyes had changed. He no longer merely looked at her, but watched with a quiet steadiness, as if to be sure she would hold fast against the weight of scorn. And for her, though she could not yet name it, a thin, fragile thread had been drawn between them, stretching taut across the distance, binding two strangers with the faintest promise of something more. The storm came without warning, rolling in from the dark edge of the horizon. Wind tore across the fields, whipping dust into the air and driving heavy clouds over the once quiet sky. The ranch house shook with each gust, the roof rattling like it might give way. She clutched a dry blanket in her arms and hurried to the porch. Through the sheets of rain, she saw him still outside by the stables, tugging at ropes, steadying horses that cried out against the thunder. She wanted to call him in, but the wind swallowed her voice. Her thin dress whipped about, tangled at her legs, nearly sending her stumbling. A sudden gust lifted the fabric high, bearing her legs in the flash of lightning. She gasped, grabbing at the cloth, but a strong hand caught hers first, pulling her back. He stood there, The cowboy, her new husband, eyes glinting beneath the storm. For one fleeting second, his gaze faltered, no longer cold, but uncertain. He took the blanket, draped it over his shoulders, and gave a small nod. Few words passed, yet enough to tell her he was not entirely indifferent. When they stepped inside, the fire in the hearth was already burning. Rain lashed against the roof, wind slammed at the windows, but within, golden flame spread its warmth. They sat across from each other in silence that stretched long. She lowered her head, smoothing wet hair, drops falling down her dress. His eyes lingered. For the first time, he truly looked at her. Dark skin glowing in the firelight, shoulders trembling under damp cloth. Not a traded good, but a woman. Present, alive, undeniable. Slowly, he reached out, brushing strands of wet hair from her cheek. His calloused fingers grazed her skin, and she started at the touch. The distance between them narrowed, their eyes locked with nothing left hidden. His hand traced down, pausing at her lips. A hesitant gesture, torn between claiming and breaking. He bent closer, his mouth a breath away. Her heart hammered, breath stilled. Then, in a flash of doubt, she tilted back, breaking the moment. The spell shattered. He clenched his fists, stepping away. Rising fast, his voice rough, he said, "Get some rest. It's late." He turned, disappearing beyond the flicker of the lamp, leaving her alone by the fire. Flames wavered, echoing the ache spreading through her chest. That night, neither of them slept. In his room, he lay with his back to the window, mind replaying the trembling lips, the startled eyes. His fists tightened, cursing his haste, yet unable to deny his heart had stirred. On her bed, she lay wide-eyed in the dark. The touch of his finger on her lips still burned. She felt both regret and wonder. If the kiss had happened, what then? The thought made her heart race, and a small smile flickered, the first time she felt she was not invisible. The storm outside raged on, but within, another fire had been lit, one not easily put out. In the days after the storm, the rhythm of the ranch seemed to slow. Work carried on as before, yet in the quiet spaces something had shifted. She was no longer left to labor alone in silence. He began to draw her into tasks by the stables, out on the open range, duties once reserved only for men. One morning, he led a horse into the yard and held out the reins. "You're going to learn to ride," he said, his tone firm. She stared in surprise, but the steady look in his eyes left no room to refuse. She placed her foot in the stirrup and clambered up, stiff and awkward. The horse tossed its head, and she gripped the reins tight, her body rigid. He stepped closer, one hand steadying the animal, the other firm against her waist, a touch so sure it stole her breath. When her balance wavered, he swung into the saddle behind her, his frame pressed against her back, his breath warm at her neck, sliding down her skin and sending a shiver through her. "Loosen up," he murmured, his voice low against her ear. "The horse can feel your fear." His hand moved over hers on the reins, guiding with patience. Each breath she drew seemed louder, tangled with the thrum of her racing heart. She could not tell if it was fear of falling or the closeness she felt for the first time. Heat radiated from his chest against her spine, and her own breaths faltered, uneven. The horse began to walk, slow and steady. He showed her how to hold the reins firm without pulling too hard. "Like this, you see?" he said. She nodded, a small smile breaking across her face. It was rare, and he found himself noticing. In the days that followed, he brought her along when driving cattle across the pasture. She learned to call out, to keep her horse level with the herd. Awkward at first, she soon caught the rhythm, and when she looked around, the ranch no longer felt like foreign ground. That afternoon, the prairie burned crimson with sunset as they rode back side by side, her in front, him behind, the horse carrying them in a slow, steady cadence like a quiet song. He leaned close, his breath brushing her ear. "Are you ready now?" he asked. She turned, puzzled, but before she could speak, her eyes caught his. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Two souls, faces bathed in firelight. He bent, lips brushing hers. Tentative at first. She trembled, then to his surprise returned the kiss. That small answer broke the dam. His arms tightened, the kiss deepened, fierce, a release of everything held back. His hand gripped her hip, drawing her close, until she nearly slid against the saddle, surrendering to the heat that surged between them. Then the horse reared its head, letting out a sharp whinny, jerking beneath them. They lurched, clutching the reins for balance. The moment shattered. Both caught themselves, breathless, eyes meeting in wild surprise. And then, laughter. Low at first, then spilling free, shaking the last of the awkwardness away. The sound bridged the space that silence had held for too long, leaving only warmth, only nearness. She knew it then. The moment had altered everything. She was no longer only the bride left behind, no longer a piece in some bargain. In his eyes, she had become something else entirely. A woman truly seen, truly wanted. The festival day arrived after weeks of preparation. The road into town bustled with wagons rolling in, families dressed in their best, children darting ahead with shouts of laughter. She sat quietly in the back of their wagon, her hands clasped tight in her lap. It was the first time she had returned to town since the wedding, and her chest stirred with a tangle of fear, unease, and a small thread of longing to glimpse life beyond the ranch. Beside her, he sat silent as ever, yet now and then his eyes shifted her way, steady, wordless, carrying something like reassurance. When the wagon stopped, they stepped down together. The festival sprawled across the square, stalls draped in bright fabrics, sweet cakes steaming with the smell of sugar, the twang of violins rising above children's laughter. For a moment, it felt like celebration. But then came the stares. Conversations faltered as she passed. Voices whispered, sharp enough to pierce. "That's her, Callahan's new wife. A colored girl. Imagine that." There were scoffs, low chuckles, muttered words aimed to reach her ears. Each cut deep, and she lowered her gaze, heart clenched, every step urging her to turn back. And then his hand closed over hers. Warm, firm, unshaken, his fingers laced with hers in full view of all. He did not speak, but he did not need to. He walked on, holding her close at his side. The crowd quieted, their murmurs breaking against the silent weight of his gesture. That hand in hers spoke clearer than words. "This is my wife. She belongs in my house. If any man objects, let him say it to me." Her eyes widened, startled. For the first time since she had come to the ranch, she felt something shift inside. The raw edge of fear gave way to the steady warmth of being seen, not as a traded good, but as a wife, acknowledged and protected. She lifted her head, a small smile touching her lips. She pressed her hand back into his, and together they walked in step. They wandered through the fair side by side. At one stall, he stopped and bought her a pale blue shawl. His words were few, rough and simple. "Suits you." She held the fabric in her hands, struck by the clumsy tenderness behind the gift. Her chest trembled, not from shame but from something new and fragile. That year, on the day of the town festival, amid all the whispers and stares, it was the strength of his open hand in hers that marked a turning point. For from that moment on, she knew with certainty she was no longer alone. That day, the sun burned hot. Work at the ranch stretched from morning until late, driving cattle across the fresh pasture, mending the broken fence, checking the stables after the storm. She was not used to such heavy labor, yet she followed him with patience, giving all she had. From a distance he watched. Beads of sweat slid from her temple down her neck, soaking the edge of her collar. The afternoon light set her skin aglow in a way he had never noticed before. Each movement, each breath she drew, stirred something in his chest, made his heartbeat stumble. When the work was done, she sank onto the wooden step by the stable, too tired to hold her posture. She lifted the water flask, drank deep, then leaned her head back against the post, eyes half closed. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, blocking the sun. Without warning, he bent and lifted her into his arms. She startled, clutching his shoulders. "What are you doing?" Her voice trembled. He tilted his head, eyes fixed on hers, a faint curve at the corner of his mouth. "You've done enough for today. Save your strength for tonight." Heat rushed to her face and she turned away, heart pounding wild. He carried her inside, straight to the old sofa in the front room. Setting her down with care, as though she might break, he sat beside her. The space shrank, filled only with the sound of their uneven breaths. He tugged open a few buttons at his chest, heat rolling off his sun-browned skin. She turned aside, yet her eyes caught on him, breath quickening. "Are you still thirsty?" he asked, voice low and slow. She nodded faintly. He lifted the flask, drank once, then leaned down. His mouth pressed to hers, passing the cool water between them. At first a shock of chill, then it melted into heat. She tried to pull back, startled, but his eyes, gentle yet unwavering, held her still. She yielded. Once, twice, 3 times, each sip turning into a kiss, clumsy yet urgent. Water slipped down her throat, down her neck, mingling with breathless gasps. His hand found hers, rough palm closing over trembling fingers. When their lips broke apart, both were panting, eyes locked with nothing left hidden. He cupped her cheek, murmuring, "Tonight, you don't have to be afraid." Her whole body shook. Never before had a man touched her with such tenderness. No longer a thing traded. No longer met with indifference. She was wanted. Truly wanted. He kissed her again. Slowly at first, then with growing fire. His arms drew her closer, her hand pressed against his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart. Clothing slipped away, not hurried but careful. She moved to cover herself, but he stilled her hands with a steady gaze. "There's no need to rush. One step at a time." Their first closeness unfolded in the glow of the hearth. Outside, rain tapped soft against the eaves. Inside, firelight cast golden shadows across the wooden walls, marking every breath, every tremor. He guided her gently, never forcing, never taking without pause. Each kiss fell like a promise, each handclasp like a vow that she would not face fear alone. Whenever she faltered, he stopped, waiting, letting her choose. And in that patience, she loosened, her trembling heart finding its own rhythm. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried. For the first time, she was not invisible, not a possession, but a woman seen and desired. The fear dissolved, leaving only the sweet shiver of belonging. Time seemed to pause. Only rain, heartbeats, and breath remained. When it was over, she lay curled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heart like a lullaby. His eyes, once cold, now burned with something new. He bent low, voice husky but sure, marking the night with his words. Now, we are truly husband and wife. She pressed her face into him, tears slipping free, not tears of sorrow, but of someone who had finally found a place to belong. He stroked her damp hair, holding her steady in the quiet. Outside, the storm faded, leaving a calm sky. Inside the wooden house, two hearts once wandering found their rhythm together. No longer strangers, no longer divided, only closeness, raw and real, binding them as husband and wife at last. The first rays slipped through the cracks of the wooden shutters, soft as a woven cloth draped over the room. She opened her eyes, disoriented for a breath, then realized she was lying in his arms. His steady arm still held her close, his warm breath brushing against her hair. Outside, the rooster had already called, marking another day's work ahead. But for her, this morning was unlike any she had ever known. She stirred slightly. He opened his eyes, gaze steady, not moving his arm away, not speaking at once. Just a deep look, enough to bring color to her cheeks, enough to make her turn aside. It had been so long since she had been looked at as a person, not an object in a bargain. He rose slowly, tugged the blanket higher over her shoulder, then sat still with his eyes fixed on the light spilling across the yard. His voice came low, deliberate, as if he weighed each word. Perhaps you've wondered why I agreed to that marriage. She stayed silent, clutching the blanket tighter in her hands. He drew in a breath, his fingers rubbing against the pillow, his gaze still set on the porch outside. I needed another hand at the ranch. That's true. But there was more. When I heard talk of marrying you off, I knew if it wasn't me, you might be given to a man far worse. I couldn't stand the thought. The words were calm, but each struck her like a needle piercing an old wound. Her vision blurred. Never before had anyone thought of what she felt. All her life she had been bartered, arranged, left to endure. Yet he had chosen her not only for her labor, but to spare her from harm. Tears spilled, silent, dampening the pillow. He turned then, unsettled, his hand brushing against her cheek, wiping the streaks with surprising care. Don't cry, he murmured. From now on, you don't have to be afraid. Her lips pressed tight, fighting the sobs, but the tears kept falling. For the first time, they were not the tears of a woman unseen, but of someone who had finally heard words that lifted the weight from her chest. That morning changed her. The day's work carried on, cattle driven to pasture, fences checked, horses watered, but all of it felt different. She no longer moved like an outsider. The hands that once clung only to broom and bucket grew steady around reins and rope. She worked not merely to survive, but because this place somehow had become hers too. He led ahead, sometimes glancing back to warn her of the horse's kicks, other times pressing a small knife into her hand, showing her how to cut through the dried grass. His eyes held no indifference now, but patience. The ranch hands still muttered, but she did not bow her head anymore. With him at her side, she found reason to walk straight, to claim her place, and from that morning on, she knew. She was not simply a bride traded away. She was part of this ranch, part of his life. The dawn after the storm within had come, opening a road where she no longer merely existed, but lived. They returned to town on a late summer morning, the dirt road cracked dry after weeks of rain. In the back of the wagon, sacks of butter, flour, and bolts of cloth jostled with each turn of the wheels. She sat beside him, hands folded tight in her lap, her face outwardly calm, though her heart beat faster than the horse's trot. Since moving to the ranch, she had not once returned to town on her own. In her memory, town meant stares that burned, whispers that cut. Even with him at her side, a gray weight pressed over her chest. The square was crowded. Merchants shouted their wares, children darted between stalls, men gathered loud around the saloon. Yet beneath all that noise, she caught the sting of voices behind her. "Look there, Callahan's new wife." Strange, a white cowboy marrying her. Couldn't find anyone else, I reckon. Laughter, light as sugar, sharp as knives. Her head lowered, hands trembling, feet aching to hurry away from the eyes. But just then he stopped. He turned, facing the men who had spoken. His face was set, eyes bright as steel under sun. His voice rang clear, not raised, but firm enough for all to hear. "Listen well, she is my wife, and I am proud of it." The square stilled. Merchants faltered mid-call, eyes turned, then lowered. No one laughed again. She froze, the world muffled in her ears, her heart clenched by a feeling she had never known. All her life she had grown used to whispers, to being set aside, unseen. Never once had anyone stood tall and declared aloud, "I am proud of her." Tears burned down her cheeks before she could stop them. She lifted her hand to hide them, but he caught her wrist, gently lowered it, letting the tears fall free. He leaned close, his voice low, husky, certain. "Don't cry for them. You have me here." The words, simple as they were, pressed balm to wounds still raw. Among all the stares of town, she no longer felt small. She felt seen, shielded, and it shook her to the core. All that day they walked the stalls, gathering what was needed. The whispers did not stop, but they no longer hollowed her. Each time she remembered his voice in the square, his hand clasping hers, her chin lifted higher. At a cloth merchant's stall, the woman behind the counter handed her a bolt of blue fabric, speaking softly. "This color suits you. Pay no mind to the rest." Startled, she looked up. In the woman's eyes lay an honest kindness, rare in this town. She could only nod, whisper thanks, and clutch the fabric to her chest like a shard of light. Crossing the square again, a few children watched her, curious more than cruel. One little girl even smiled. A fleeting glance, yet it eased something inside her, as though confidence were being stitched back one piece at a time. By the time the wagon rolled away at dusk, the sun spilled gold across the grassland. She turned to him, eyes still red. He kept his gaze forward, reins steady in his hands, but the corner of his mouth bent in a faint smile. Her voice trembled. "Thank you for standing up for me." He shook his head, eyes on the horizon. "No need for thanks. It's what a husband should do." She fell quiet, but her heart thundered. Never before had anyone shielded her. Her father had bartered her like coin. Neighbors had dismissed her. Yet here was a man, taciturn, plain-spoken, declaring in front of all that he was proud she was his. That night, under the silver wash of moon, the ranch lay still. Horses settled in their stalls and supper was done. He sat on the porch, sharpening his knife, while she spread the new fabric across her lap, planning a dress. The crickets sang in the grass. Her voice broke the quiet. "Aren't you afraid of what they'll say?" He paused, lifted his eyes to her, steady and long. His words came slow but strong. "They can say what they like. I know this much. I chose you, and I have never regretted it." Her fingers clutched the cloth, throat tightening. The old wounds, barbed words, years of being less than, still ached. But for the first time she felt a shoulder broad enough to lean against. And she knew then those wounds would heal. Not because of time, but because she had someone who would stand tall in the open, unashamed, and proud to call her his. Harvest had ended, leaving the wide fields of the ranch heavy with the scent of cut straw. While the hands rested, he chose to take her to the orphanage at the edge of town, a weathered wooden house where children without kin lived together under one roof. The road stretched long, wagon wheels grinding over dry dust, raising a faint trail behind. She sat beside him, fingers twisting in her lap, trying to keep her face calm, though her chest trembled. It had been so long since she had shown herself anywhere beyond the ranch. In her mind, towns meant stares, whispers, the kind that scalded cheeks with shame. Even now, knowing he was with her, she carried the weight of it like a shadow over her head. He kept the reins firm, eyes forward, speaking only once. "They need help there, and I thought you might like it." When they arrived, the sound of hooves barely stilled before children rushed out in a flood. Their eyes sparkled, smiles wide despite patched clothes and dusty hands. One boy still sticky with pine sap, another with hair tangled wild. But each voice rose in joy at the sight of him. It was plain this was not his first visit. "Uncle Callahan!" a small boy cried, clutching his leg with a laugh. He ruffled the boy's hair, then turned to her, his voice steady and clear. "This is my wife. From now on, call her sister." She froze. 2 words, "my wife," fell as natural as breath, yet her heart jolted. He had never spoken it aloud in front of others. Warmth surged through her, strange and new. Inside the old house, work never ceased. The thin, weary woman who managed the place hurried from one chore to another. Without hesitation, she rolled her sleeves, scrubbing, cooking, washing. Soon enough, the children clung to her as if they had always known her. Her favorite hour came on the porch. The children gathered at her feet, eyes wide, eager for stories. She spoke of rains back home, of wagons rolling endless roads, and of fairy tales once whispered by her grandmother. Their laughter rang so pure it stung her eyes. Each smile was a stitch mending the tattered cloth of her heart. He took another roll. Out in the yard, he led the boys, showing them how to sit straight in a saddle, how to hold the reins steady. His deep voice carried patience, his large hand guiding each boy's posture, eyes sharp to keep them safe. A man of few words, often stern, now steady as a father. One evening they tugged her outside to watch. He lifted a tiny girl onto the horse, her thin arms wrapped around his neck, her little legs trembling. He soothed her, voice soft, unlike any she had heard from him before. "Don't be afraid. I've got you." The picture held her still. The child's trust, his sun-browned face in the light of dusk, the golden sky behind them. She wished she could hold that moment forever. When night fell and the children slept, the caretaker clasped her hands. "Since Callahan began coming, they've been brighter. And now, with you, they'll almost feel they've got a family." The words struck deep. Family. For her, it had always been a faint dream, never within reach. Yet looking at those children, she understood. Their presence that day had given the little ones a glimpse of it, and perhaps given her one as well. On the road home, stars spread wide above. She sat quiet, the wagon rocking, heart stirred by a sense unfamiliar. She was not alone. No longer just a wife bartered off. She was a woman who could tell stories, share joy, carry responsibility at his side. For the first time, she could imagine a house filled not only with work and silence, but with children's laughter. He slowed the reins, glancing at her flushed cheek in the dim starlight. He did not question her thoughts, did not speak them aloud. Instead, he reached over, his broad hand folding around hers and resting it on his thigh. She startled, then let it remain. His touch held steady warmth, like an anchor mooring her through storm. By the time they reached the ranch, the moon had climbed high. That night she lay awake, staring into darkness, the images replaying, children calling her sister, his arms steadying a trembling girl on horseback. A door had opened within her, and she knew. From this day forward, she was no longer adrift. Home was not wood or stone. It was the grasp of small hands, the trust in young eyes, the bond between two souls choosing to build something more. Home, she realized, was born in the joining of hearts. The news came on a gentle morning, when the sun had yet to dry the dew from the grass. She woke with a heaviness in her body, different from simple weariness, as though she carried a secret not yet named. Her hand drifted to her belly, and with it rose a strange, undeniable knowing. In the small wooden kitchen, old Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper of many years, watched her quietly, then nodded, her eyes warm, lips trembling as though she wanted to say more. Finally, she whispered, "Perhaps the Lord has sent you a gift." Her heart pounded. Just a handful of words, yet they struck with certainty. The instinct had not lied. Within her, a new life stirred. At first, confusion filled her. She, who had once been treated like an object, who had trembled at the thought of belonging to any family, now carried a fragile life inside. The idea left her trembling with fear, yet brimming with wonder. Alone on the porch, she would press her palm to her stomach and whisper questions to the silence. Could she be a mother? Could she give a child the home she had never known? That evening, at supper, the lamplight caught his face. Their eyes met by chance, and for an instant she saw a quiet spark in his gaze, as if he already knew. No question, no spoken confirmation. Only silence, but in that silence her doubt melted into trust. From then on, the ranch seemed to beat with a new rhythm. The hands shifted in their manner toward her. The sharp whispers that had once cut her dulled away, replaced with murmured congratulations, cautious but genuine. When she crossed the yard with her hand resting on her belly, men paused to nod their respect. Her steps grew lighter. Every task she took, a bundle of hay lifted, a fence mended, carried weight not only for today, but for tomorrow. This land, once foreign and unwelcoming, now held meaning. Here she was planting a seed of hope. One evening, when the day's work had settled and the young moon lay pale above, he found her sitting on the porch. Without speaking, he pulled a chair close. In the stillness, his rough hand slid over hers, then rested on her stomach. She trembled. The warmth of his palm seeped through cloth, more eloquent than any vow. His eyes dropped, softened, carrying a depth she had never seen. He stayed that way until a breath escaped him, low and rough. Here, a seed is taking root. Her throat tightened, tears welling. She had never heard words wrapped in such faith. He went on, voice steady yet edged with feeling. I once thought this ranch needed nothing but cattle and green pastures. But now I see. What makes a home live is family, and you have brought that to me. She buried her face against his shoulder, tears spilling freely. He asked nothing, only wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, steadying them both with his strength. That night they sat long under the stars. No speeches, no promises, only the quiet thrum of two hearts steadying into one. Crickets chirped in the kifsa, fields, horses shifted in their stalls, all weaving into a hymn of peace. In her heart, for the first time, she saw a future clear. A wooden house alive with laughter, little hands clutching at her dress, the patter of small feet across the floorboards. And beside her, he would be there still, the silent cowboy with the steady hands, guiding the tender shoots that life had placed in their care. The moon rose high, silvering her hair. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her brow. She closed her eyes, whispered like a prayer. I am no longer afraid of tomorrow. He did not answer, only tightened his arms as though to seal the vow in silence. In the days that followed, she noticed herself change. No longer did she avoid mirrors. No longer did she shrink from others' eyes. Something new burned within her gaze. A flame soft yet strong, born of trust in the child she carried. When she passed the stables, the horses neighed as though they sensed the joy she bore. Even the land itself, once harsh and distant, seemed to soften and cradle her. And at night, lying beside him, her hand rested on her belly. In her heart she whispered, You are my hope, and you are proof that I have found my true home. On that quiet ranch night, two once lost souls held close, cradling a seed of hope that grew unseen in the dark. A family had begun, not with words, but with the beating of three hearts, bound together as one. Winter night lay over the prairie like a thick quilt. Wind whistled through the cracks of the wooden walls, rattling the ranch house as though it were a toy in the storm's hand. Snow piled against the porch steps, blocking the path, and the fire in the hearth flared and dimmed, fighting to hold back the cold and dark pressing in on every side. In the back room, the heat from the stove barely reached. She writhed on the bed layered with quilts, cold sweat soaking her hair and pillow. Her hands clutched the sheets, veins rising sharp against her skin as pain gripped her body again and again. He sat close, his wide hand locked around hers, though his own fingers trembled like a child's. Through all his winters, Storms, wild beasts, barroom fights. He had never felt this helpless. The woman he loved more than his own breath fought for life, and he could do nothing but hold on. Her cries tore through the room, mixing with the howl of wind outside. Mrs. Henderson and two hired women rushed about, wiping her brow, boiling water, urging her to breathe steady. But her breath came in gasps, ragged, breaking. He bent low, pressing his forehead to her damp hand, his voice hoarse and shaking. "You're strong. Just a little more. I'm right here." She clenched her teeth, tears streaking her face, yet in her eyes flickered a fire of faith. This child was proof of everything. The life she had reclaimed, the love they had built, the home she once believed she'd never have. Outside, the storm raged, battering the roof as though it would tear the house loose from its foundations. Inside, time crawled, every second stretched thin. He gripped her hand tighter, his own body jerking with each wave of pain she endured. Every cry from her chest cut through him as though it split his own flesh. She thrashed, then collapsed back into the pillows, breath breaking. He clumsily wiped her brow, his rough hand far from gentle, but never leaving hers. For the first time in his hard life, the cowboy who had weathered so much felt small, fragile, undone. The hours dragged. Her hair clung wet to her temples, her pillow drenched. She drifted close to collapse, yet his voice and his grip anchored her. And then, at the moment when her strength seemed gone, a new sound pierced the storm. A cry. Thin at first, then sharp, alive. He froze. His heart stopped, then pounded harder than ever. Tears burned his cheeks before he knew they had fallen. That sound was not pain. It was a song of life. "A strong girl," Mrs. Henderson whispered, trembling as she lifted the tiny child, wrapped quick in a quilt. She collapsed against the pillow, drained, yet her eyes sought the sound. When the newborn was laid on her chest, skin to skin, her sobs broke free. But these tears were not of fear or bitterness. They were joy, pure and raw, something she had never touched before. He bent near, clumsy fingers brushing her hair back, then reaching for the child. The baby's hand closed, around his finger, small, fragile, yet pulsing with life. He laughed through his tears, a sound broken and new. For the first time, the quiet cowboy's heart felt too full to contain. "Our daughter," he whispered, voice trembling like the draft through the door. She smiled, lips pale, whispering back, "I never thought I'd hear my child's cry in my own arms." He pressed his lips to her brow, words low and fierce. "The darkness is gone. From now on, you'll never be alone." In that small room, the wind outside seemed to falter, the storm bowing to the cry of new life. Only the mother's steadying breath, the child's thin but certain wail, and the father's tender gaze remained. That winter night, a daughter was born, tiny, fragile, yet the living proof of their love, of their long silence and endurance, of a miracle of renewal. He sat there, watching mother and child in the glow of the fire. The calluses on his hands, the scars on his arms meant nothing. This moment was the greatest gift he had ever been given. She drifted into sleep, worn but at peace. He stayed beside her, never letting go of her hand. At times he leaned close to watch the baby stir, her eyes blinking like small stars. A tired, joyous smile softened his weathered face. And in that moment, they both knew, every winter yields at last. Dawn will come, bringing with it a life brighter than any they had dared to dream. Years had passed since that winter night, when their daughter's first cry split the dark and chased the shadows from both their hearts. The ranch was no longer only cattle, tender grass, and harvest seasons. It had become a home full of laughter, where small feet never stopped running. That morning, dawn laid gold across the prairie, soft light sweeping over fences and stalls, turning dew to 1,000 pearls. From the porch came children's voices, bright and echoing, calling for Ma and Pa. The firstborn girl had become a quick-witted big sister, her eyes alight, a mirror of his. Beside her, a younger brother toddled after, laughing, tumbling, letting their joy spill across the yard. She leaned against the porch post, the baby in her arms, her hair lifted by the early wind. Her eyes were bright, gentled by a rare peace. The old years, when she'd been treated like chattel, when no one spoke her name with respect, had slipped back like a fading bad dream. He came from the stables, shirt slung over his shoulder, hands carrying the scent of hay. Seeing his wife and the children on the porch, his gaze softened with a tenderness rare in a cowboy taught to live quiet. He stepped in, wrapped an arm around her narrow yet steady shoulders, and kissed her temple. "You still wake before the rest of us," he said, a low laugh in his voice, half teasing. She tipped her face up, eyes shining. "It's a habit from days when I had to learn to survive. Now, I rise early to feel I'm truly living." He said nothing more, only held her tighter, as if setting her words into his own breath. The children rushed in, tugging at their parents' shirts, begging to be carried, to hear a story, to be led out to the fields. The ranch hummed, horses neighing, children laughing, one full chorus of home. By afternoon, when the work eased, the family gathered close. He sat honing a saddle, the little ones chasing each other in the yard, while she mended small shirts. Now and then their eyes met. No words were needed. Both knew this was what they had been reaching for all those years. Then one evening, as sunset poured red fire over the prairie, they stood together on the porch. Light ran long, taking the sky whole. Her voice came soft, steady despite a tremor. "I have a real home now." He turned and took her hand, the same hand once roughened by labor, now warm in his. Their eldest tugged at her mother's sleeve, laughing. "This is our home, isn't it, Mama?" She bent and kissed her child's hair. Tears slid, but her eyes shone like the dawn before them. "Yes, this is our home." Years had passed since that winter night, when their daughter's first cry split the dark and chased the shadows from both their hearts. The ranch was no longer only cattle, tender grass, and harvest seasons. It had become a home full of laughter, where small feet never stopped running. That morning, dawn laid gold across the prairie. Soft light swept over fences and stalls, turning dew to 1,000 pearls. From the porch came children's voices, bright and echoing, calling for Ma and Pa. The firstborn, Elise, was now a lively big sister, her eyes bright and fierce like her father's. Beside her, the younger brother toddled after, laughing, tripping, letting peals of mirth ring across the yard. She leaned against the porch post, the baby in her arms, her long hair lifted in the early breeze, her gaze alight, gentled by a rare calm. The old years, when she'd been treated like a thing, when no one spoke her name with respect, had faded like a sorrowing dream. He stepped from the stables, shirt over his shoulder, hands still smelling of hay. Seeing his wife and the children on the porch, his eyes softened, a tenderness seldom seen in a quiet, close-kept cowboy. He came near, folded an arm around those spare yet steady shoulders, and kissed her temple. "You still wake before everyone," he said with a rough smile, a hint of tease. She looked up, eyes bright. "It's a habit from the old days, when I had to learn to survive. Now, I rise early to feel I'm truly living." He said nothing more, only held her closer, as if carving her words into his own breath. The children swarmed them, tugging for rides and walks to the pasture. The ranch rang with horses' calls and children's laughter, a full song of home. Through the years, the ranch had grown. From the first small herds, folks across the region now knew the Callahan stock, hardy, strong, well-kept. He pushed the fence line south, dug new wells, raised new barns. She labored beside him. Beyond caring for the children, she gathered the ranch women, teaching sewing and embroidery. On many afternoons, the yard filled with the click of needles and easy talk. Hands once only tied to plow and field found a craft, and with it, confidence. The ranch no longer belonged only to the couple. It had become a place where the town came for work, for help, for fellowship. Elise shot up tall, hair tied back, eyes clear and steady like her father's. She loved riding, racing with the ranch kids at day's end. Samuel, the second, stayed a mischief maker, forever stirring laughter from the whole house. The littlest clung to his mother, eyes wide with wonder, as if seeing the world for the first time. Once at harvest, Elise stood beside her mother, shears in hand, sweat beading her brow. From a distance he watched, a rare smile showing. "She takes after you." Sturdy, never complaining. Her gaze softened. "She takes after you more. Steady, quiet, full of heart." They both laughed, and the sound carried through the red of evening. Winter had once meant fear, wind howling, snow closing every road. But with the children, winter lost its gloom. The wooden house glowed with the hearth's fire, with the smell of sweet bread from the kitchen, with nights of the family gathered close. Elise read to her brothers. Samuel sprawled and dozing, the baby's head pillowed on Ma's lap, one small hand clenched in Pa's coat. He sat quiet, taking it all in. Many hard winters had come, but none as warm as this. Good news of the ranch traveled. Poor townsfolk came seeking hay, and he never turned them away. Orphaned children they had once helped dropped by at harvest to lend hands, bringing gratitude with them. She opened a small porch school, teaching letters to the hands' children. Each Sunday morning, little ones sat in a ring, eyes bright, watching each letter she traced on the wooden board. He stood behind, silent, pride rising unbidden. The ranch thrived not only on cattle or green seasons, but on the love sown there, sprouting, taking root, and spreading wide. One evening, as sunset poured red fire over the prairie, they stood together on the porch. Light ran long, taking the sky whole. Her voice came soft, steady despite a tremor. "I have a real home now." He turned, quietly taking her hand, those fingers once toughened by work, now gentle in his grip. Elise tugged at her mother's sleeve, laughing. "This is our home, isn't it, Mama?" She bent and kissed her daughter's hair. Tears slid, but her eyes shone like the dawn ahead. "Yes, This is our home. He watched them, something stilling inside. All the solitary years, the cold winters, the town's mean talk, gone. Only family remained, the greatest legacy he'd ever know. Next morning, soft light washed the prairie gold. The family stood on the porch again, their shadows joining the early sun. Elise grinned wide. Samuel chased a little dog. The baby clapped at a horse's whinny. She, once traded like a thing, had become a wife, a mother, and above all, a woman honored. The ranch, once rough land, now stood as a legacy of love, left not only to their children, but to the whole community. It was a journey from silence to understanding, from strangers to kin, from old wounds to a full happiness. And that story, like dawn after a long storm, would live on in the small footsteps that followed across that ground. Maybe, after all the turns that couple had weathered, from a quiet, arranged wedding, through the town's scorn, to winters broken by a baby's cry, what lingered was not a fine ranch alone, but a legacy of love. The woman once treated as goods had become the heart of a family, a gentle mother to children raised under the open sky. The cowboy once closed and spare had become husband and father, willing to stand before a town and claim pride in the one he chose. From old wounds, they built a true home, where each dawn lit laughter, where small feet ran the yard, where sorrowed memories gave way to peace. There was nothing flashy in it, no power, no gold, only slow heartbeats, steady hands, plain words. Yet these ordinary things made the extraordinary, turning a bargained marriage into a lasting home, turning silence into the language of love, turning hard soil into a place where love could take root. Looking back, in the twilight years, many of you may find the same truth. The rarest treasure is not how far you've gone, but who walked beside you. A glance most folks miss, a quiet hand on your shoulder, a simple, "I'm proud to have you." Such things can become the finest memories you carry all your life. The prairie here is only a setting, but also a mirror. After every hard winter, dawn returns. After pain, love, nurtured with patience and respect, bears fruit. So what do you think? Do you hold a memory that lit your heart like dawn after a storm? A moment you knew you had a home, a place to return? Share it in the comments. Your stories will warm more hearts than you know. If this tale touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and share so more folks can listen. This will be our place to keep these Wild West love stories, simple, deep pieces of love, so that on quiet evenings we can sit and smile with our own memories.